And we're gonna go live on Facebook. Live on Facebook. Just a second, I'm trying to. Live Facebook. Wissam, oh, maybe. Hold on. Connected. One Gaza. Public. Live. This public. Your page. ThawraTV. All right. We are preparing to stream. Connecting to Facebook. We should be live. We should be live. Can you check?
Yes, you are.
We are live. We are live. We are live on ThawraTV. I would like to thank you, Jim Zoghby, Jim Clancy, Wissam Yafi to be with us, and Daisy. Good to see you as well. You just came in. I would like to thank you all to be with us on ThawraTV in this very important time in history, and very sad day for press and for media, in terms of fake news, in terms of killing journalists, shooting journalists by accident or by targeting them, like what happened yesterday. We had Issam Abdullah he was killed in the line of duty from Reuters and Al Jazeera, and lots of happening and lots of happening in the social media and in the media. It's not like it used to be before, Jim. I would like to start with you, Jim Clancy. What's your take on this, and what advice do you give for the young journalist, for either with CNN or others, and like us, or it's changed since you were reporting here 30 years ago, or for 3 decades here in the region? What's your take on this? I would like to start, and very sad today also to announce, Giselle Khoury passed away as well. Very big friend of Wissam as well. It's very sad for media and for Haida. I'll leave it to you, Jim Clancy. Please go ahead. What you'd like to say, advice, and how we gonna what you would like to say for young journalists.
Well, first, let me begin. I hadn't heard about Giselle Khoury, and that is truly sad news. Yeah. So sorry to hear that. My condolences to her family. And when I say her friends, she had probably millions of them who watched her on the air, watched her reporting. Here was someone who always tried to do a fair job and tell the story with the facts and not with just emotions. And emotions have had a lot to do with this story. It unfolded on the 7th of October, and we were shocked. Everyone was shocked at the ferocity of this assault. That as we looked at the towns and the villages outside Gaza, as they rampaged through, Hamas militants really committed war crimes and terrorism. Textbook example. And it caused the press, I think, they were taken aback here in the United States, that's for sure. And it wasn't long before we heard from the pro-Israeli groups, ADL and others, who personally came out and demanded that Hamas's fighters not be described as militants, not be described as fighters, but be described as terrorists. It's a prima facie case. They were terrorists, the ones who were taking part in that, but there were no Palestinian voices pretty much in the early going on CNN. Christian Amanpour brought in a Palestinian voice, and Fareed Zakaria would bring in a Palestinian voice. But All of the voices were coming really from one side, expressing outrage and real alarm, because people realize the significance of this event. And this is one of the things, as a young journalist, if you get involved in this, you have to really be doubly careful to be talking about facts, to be talking about what you eyewitnessed, not telling the stories from people on the streets who, because of the sheer emotions involved in a catastrophe like this, the sheer emotions trigger people and they push them to say things that they might not otherwise say. They're said in anger. And you have to sort that out and judge why people are saying these things. So, caution is a good word of advice. I think already people have seen that some of the reports that were coming out very early on have not been substantiated. At the same time, there's little doubt, and I think we all agree on that these were massacres of innocent civilians in so many cases. Heartbreaking to, now that people are being held inside Gaza. And there's a fundamental question: why? For what?
Wissam?
Yeah, I agree with Jim in terms of his assessment and the shock that the world kind of felt. For those who have been really kind of looking at the region and studying the region, it may not have come as much of a shock, just because of the context of what's been happening. And the shock could be, kind of seen from slightly different angles. One angle is clearly the civilian angle. But there's also, other angles to the shock, which is like, how the Israelis basically. Could everybody be muted, please? Could everybody be muted, please?
هيدي شو منتور؟ هيدي منتور يعني فيها نعناع؟
لا ما فيها. Everybody be muted, please.
Yeah.
لا ما فيها شيء.
Sal, can you mute, please?
Sorry.
Thank you. So let me just repeat that the shock really came from different angles. The civilian angle was clearly a shock to us all as humans, but there was also the other angles, the military angle, which is how Israel was breached. I would say so fairly easily, to a certain degree that people started to question, was this self-inflicted, but not giving any credit to the capabilities that Hamas had grown over the past few years. Then there was the shock of the coverage of the actual journalistic coverage, which is, kind of looking at least from a Western perspective, and I happen to have global media on TV, and I can understand both languages, English and Arabic, and if you'd watched the BBC and the CNN coverage, and then you turned into Al Arabiya or Al Jazeera, it's as if they were covering completely two different events. And so to get your truth was very hard for viewers. And so that was also kind of a third angle to the shock. And then of course, now that the war, as it's been coined by Netanyahu, is in its Palestinian or on the Gazan side phase, the shock of the utter destruction. Now, this is not the first time that we see this kind of retaliation from Israel, but just the sheer scale of it. I mean, it harkens one back to World War II, cities that were completely annihilated. And so, and of course, the shock of what's typically referred to in Hebrew as the chutzpah, of asking 1 million people to actually relocate within 24 hours. So all these are shocks that have been felt by viewers, and things are just starting now to kind of filter down and to start making sense of what is real, what is not real, and the implication that it has on the people and the societies which are affected. Jim Zoghby.
Well, so much to say. I agree with so much of what Jim Clancy said and what Wissam said. But there is, I think, for all of us, a bit of PTSD here. Having seen this before so many times, certainly from 67, but also certainly 82 and then the 2006 in Lebanon and 2008 and 10 and 12 and 14 and on and on. There's a sense we've been down this road before, and we know where it ends up, which is right back where we are, right back where we were when it started, with the difference that there's more people dead, there's more bitterness and anger, more fear and frustration, and more hardliners on all sides. This is not going to end well, and the foolishness of the rhetoric coming out of all sides is something that is deplorable. I mean, reading the Arab press, Wissam, and seeing the celebration of resistance. I mean, for God's sake, Jim Clancy's right. These were massacres of kids at a rave concert, for God's sake. 260 kids, probably high and listening to music and dancing and just mowed down. That's not resistance. If that's resistance, we have to throw out the dictionary and come up with another word for real resistance. I remember Tawfiq Zayed, the mayor of Nazareth, said one time, you have the right to it, but if you use it as badly as you do, you forfeit the right. That's not resistance. That was massacre. That's all it was. At the same time, Israel may have the right to defend itself, but this is not defending itself. This is committing genocide. And so we need, we almost need a new lexicon here to define terms in a better way. While one could almost understand, but never excuse what Hamas did or what Israel is doing. I mean, understand in the sense that these are bad players who carry out bad actions all the time. What is completely beyond me is this administration here in Washington. I've been through, I started doing this work in the Carter administration. I don't know of an administration that has handled a crisis in the Middle East as badly as this one has. It is embarrassing, frustrating, and angering to hear the rhetoric coming out of Washington. We could be the adult in the room, and instead we become a cheerleader, a coat holder, and an enabler. And I think at the end of the day, it not only makes Israel more insecure when this is over, certainly Palestinians will be less secure, but it makes the United States less respected and less secure in the broader region. We are behaving horrifically. There was a time in the beginning when we could have helped stop this. We have not. And what is happening in Gaza now is frightening, because I believe that the Israelis, in fact, want to do what they did in Lebanon, which is to create a buffer zone, an area where they cleanse the region of Palestinians. This notion that they're offering tents and food if you cross into Egypt, Palestinians are going to reject that because they know what it means. You'll never come back. You'll never come back. It's a Nakba. And here, I've said this, and some people get it, and some folks at the White House, when I told them this, not only didn't get it, but got angry with me. I said, I understood the Israeli reaction to what happened on the 7th. There is a trauma in the Israeli psyche coming from the Holocaust. The fear, the sense of vulnerability, the sense that history has been against us. And so they reacted with that trauma. And Palestinians have the same trauma coming from the Nakba. It's part of their self-identity, just like the Holocaust is for Israelis. And so they see what's happening, not just now, but what has been happening in Gaza. And what they see is a sense of history again repeating itself with the same vulnerability and the same fear and the same loss of control of their own history. We have to understand that, and we don't. We just don't. And so what I got when I said that, somebody said, you can't say it's both sidism. It is both sidism. And if the United States can't understand both sides, we got no business being involved in this region. There are two peoples, two humanities, two histories, and both have to be understood and reconciled, or else we're not going anywhere other than more massacres in the future. done.
Wissam, I want to ask you a question. Do you think the stories of the babies is true? You wrote an article about that. Can you please tell us your on that, about the baby stories?
Well, I don't know if it is true or not. What I do know is that there hasn't been any evidence submitted. And what I do know is that there's been a lot of retraction of the story even by the journalist that stated it. The problem I have, and the reason that I wrote the article, was not so much to deny that there were civilian deaths. That's clear. That clearly happened, and that is not acceptable by any humanity or civilization, at least in as much as it could be avoided. The problem I have with it is why those who are removed from the immediate emotion of it aren't really investigating to find out whether these claims, the babies being, I would say, the most extreme of them, right? Why they aren't investigating them. Is there an agenda behind such claims? I mean, the events were horrific in and of themselves. I mean, why do you need to kind of take it to a certain level of saying that there were 40 babies that were beheaded? It's almost as if you're dehumanizing your enemy in order to do what exactly? And we saw something of the sort, with ISIS. Clearly, ISIS was that kind of an organization that was doing monstrous things. And so you're starting to see in the media, and this is not accidental, but the relationship with ISIS. Yesterday, I was watching a YouTube channel, and I got an advertisement. That advertisement, I usually just kind of ignore the advertisement, skip after 3 seconds. That advertisement was from the Israeli state, based on the media that I was watching, which was about the conflict. And that advertising was clearly linking Hamas with ISIS. Now, Hamas perpetrated, crimes, but is it really, the same as ISIS? And why don't you, I guess, just say that it's Hamas and it's perpetrated its crimes? But connecting it to ISIS, in my mind, is trying to drive the agenda of certain nations, particularly the United States, to do something, either get involved in the war or provide something or money or resources, whatever it is. That to me is a problem that I hope that global journalists will try to not fall trap into. That's kind of my biggest concern. So yes, I wrote this article about the babies. I was questioning those who came up with the story. Where were these babies? Why haven't their names come out? I mean, these are humans. If the story is true, shouldn't they be honored? Shouldn't they be? Where's the hospital? Where's the doctor? Where are the doctors that may have, and the beheading, like babies could die or children could die, but that there's 40 beheadings means that it was systematic beheading. Were they in a daycare? Were they all together and somebody just went on a rampage? All those facts to me are not clear and were not asked. And I think if we're going to maintain our humanity, we need to ask these hard questions. These are hard questions, but we need to ask them. And that is why I wrote that article. And it was not to diminish the value of the lives lost, but really to avoid, agendas being driven.
Daisy, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to jump in on a couple of the comments. And Wissam, I totally agree with you. There's a failure of journalistic responsibility, particularly on that story of the babies. All the facts you pointed out in that article are absolutely correct. There was no validation, no proof, just commentary. And I can only say that I can only assume, being a journalist, that it is to drive an agenda to make it much more acceptable globally, to change global opinion, so it's acceptable that all of these atrocities that have now been committed by Israel in response to the horrific acts committed by Hamas are much more palatable on a global level. So yeah, journalists are being called to task right now, and the comments that we've already shared. I'm in contact with a lot of journalists overseas, and particularly in Australia, asking me my opinion, and they keep feeding me reports from the IDF or images from the IDF saying these things are happening. I said, well, where's the proof? It's an image with a comment from the IDF, but where is the proof that that is actually happening? There's no validation. Don't just fall into that trap. Make sure you've got verified other sources that are verifying the information you're receiving, because it's misinformation. This is a perfect case of misinformation. There's so much from Australia as well that's coming out on the side of Israel, trying to drive the agenda that it's, you know, justified, because the Australian Prime Minister stood up with the US administration. There were 4 that stood up. It was the US, Australia, France, and England, who all stood up immediately, as I point out in a video I launched on Friday, which has gone viral, that these leaders have stood up validating Israel's response and not even mentioning the word Palestinians, or not even referring to the 5 days or 6 days of bombardment and you know, flattening of Gaza, which is unacceptable. And I draw that connection because, see, media takes its lead from politicians. And if the politicians are stating this line, then media tycoons and media leaders are justified in driving that narrative. So this is where journalists who are truly, you know, respect their industry and respect their profession must push out much more balanced perspectives. And I've been trying to do that, and I've had a lot of comments from Israelis as well, Jewish people as well as Palestinians, being grateful that we're trying to deliver a balanced line to present facts fairly. It's going to be up to people who are in the broader, you know, community, who have to use the guidelines that we have been taught for decades and implement that and deliver content much more fairly. But my point I've been driving for the last few days is that we need to take the fight to the politicians, because we can't afford this to become an anti-Semitic rage and there be, you know, global anti-Semitism rise again with so much right-wing fascist groups all over the world. We can't give them an excuse to rise against the Jewish people, because those Jewish people are not involved in this massacre either. We've seen Jewish people in New York who've come out and said, "Not in my name, Benjamin Netanyahu."
Thank you, Daisy. Jim Clancy, please, what you'd like to say about this, about what you heard?
Well, I agree with what all of the guests have said. I think that one of the things you've got to perceive here is that there is a lot resting on the shoulders of individual journalists at this time, a lot. That is because the media houses are intimidated. They don't want to go, they want to make sure that they don't show, quote, disloyalty to Israel or to single them out or for themselves to be singled out as favoring a view against Israel. And so they're taking a very cautious position as they begin to do this. What we need to do as journalists is, as the other guests have described here, try to give voice to everyone and describe the situation as it really exists with the facts that we know, not the hearsay that we have from some channel on the internet. It really behooves us to spend some time and do some hard work and some hard thinking about how to present this story and how to cover it. Right now, I think, and it reminds me, going back to 2006, when there was the war in Lebanon, and Condoleezza Rice announced that, you know, we haven't let Israel go far enough. They need a little bit more time. As we were watching the infrastructure of an entire nation crumble to its knees. And this whole notion that we give people more time in order to accomplish their military goals is not an acceptable thing to do. I mean, if laws are being broken, if crimes are being committed, we have to call that out. And I just hope that people do, because it's going to get a lot worse, a whole lot worse, before this is over.
Let me just say one thing about the media coverage. On MSNBC, Ayman Mohyeddin, Mehdi Hassan, and Ali Velshi have been removed from their anchors positions during this conflict as a deliberate effort to silence them. They were the ones who were having alternative voices on. I think somebody raised the question before, I think it was Wissam maybe, about how there have been so few voices on the networks. That's the reason why, because there's intimidation of the networks to silence these voices. And while Christiana Amanpour can get away with it, and Fareed Zakaria gets away with it, the anchors on MSNBC couldn't get away with it. And CNN, Jim, they haven't called me in maybe 7 years to do anything.
Well,
and neither have they called any of the other folks in the community, just a couple here or there. But the networks have a responsibility here and have failed miserably. It's reporters talking to reporters, and frankly echoing in many instances the line coming from the administration, or covering it from the Israeli side and simply not seeing the other side because they're not there to see it, and they're not getting reports from what's happening inside Gaza to the extent that that is necessary to demonstrate this humanitarian crisis.
I guess
Right, none of the major-
at this point,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry, Jim. I guess also there's a question of timing. The first few days clearly has been a shock to the Israeli system, but clearly now the battle has moved inside of Gaza. And so what will the story continue to be in the media that is ignoring Gaza? What is it going to be?
It'll be like it was in 2014. It'll be reporters standing outside in the what they call the Gaza envelope from Israeli side, reporting what is happening inside. The same way, I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend anybody here, but the same way that in 1982, the reporting about what was happening in West Beirut, the Israeli bombardments, was coming from reporters outside of not seeing it at all, but taking hearsay reports on it from
But
East
don't you
Beirut.
think things have changed in terms of the media reach right now, Jim? I mean, I was in Beirut in 1982. I was inside of the
Yeah.
siege. Unfortunately, it's
Yeah.
not much of a happy memory for me. But like now, you have a lot of global media from the other side capturing this, within Gaza, as well as you have a lot of social media coverage.
That's where kids are getting
I'm wondering
information.
how much that's going to have an effect of
That's
keeping.
where that's where folks are getting information from social media. They're not getting it from mainstream media right now. And like I said, the three guys who you could count on to get a balanced story have simply been removed from MSNBC, from their anchors positions during this conflict.
Well, in
no
all
one
fairness,
would dare
let me
remove
just say
a
this.
Jewish reporter from covering a story. But the three guys who were covering it and doing it with a sense of balance have been removed. That is absolutely shocking.
Well, Ali Velshi is actually assigned to the story, and he's there. He's inside Israel right now doing his reporting. And I've been watching all of the networks. I haven't seen Ayman in a bit, but I've been pretty busy. I haven't seen a lot of MSNBC in the last day or so. I'm going to look for him because you're right. He had some important perspective there. He too was outraged by all of this, by the severity of these massacres and the obviousness of the viciousness that was involved in all of that. But he brought some Palestinian perspective, and I know the man, and I know that he's covered this story. I was in Gaza with him. I was there in 1982. There was a huge difference, though, between then and now. And that difference is that I was staying at the hotel in East Beirut, and we would travel to West Beirut every day. And the cameraman and the sound tech definitely wanted to get out by the time the Israelis began bombing around 1 PM. And, we got caught in there several times, but we could travel back and forth. Why? Because people on the ground, the average citizenry, trusted the news media to be trying to do their job, to be going between one side or another. In the years that have passed since then, both the activists, whether it's the IDF or whether it's Hamas, whatever group it might be, they expect that you're going to be a problem if you're in their territory, that they're going to have a problem with you. And so they limit your movements. They try to control you on the ground, which they didn't do back in 1982. And so it's a different set of rules for everybody. And for those that are inside, the people that are reporting, as you say, doing a job as citizen journalists or as representatives of small media outlets, are really providing a very necessary service right now. And it's, it's not the future of journalism, it's journalism today, the way that it's happening. But you've got to respect the fact that there are some people who are going to be advocates when they get into that position. And that's what I think needs to be avoided. Otherwise, everybody loses credibility. And we need the truth right now about what is happening. We need people who we can depend on to provide the truth, the evidence of what is happening.
And gain back the trust, because some of the big outlets lost their trust. I have friends of mine, they don't watch anymore. I'm not gonna say what, but they're not watching what they used to watch. Do you think we should move to the geopolitics section, because we have two sections to cover? We have the geopolitics and the future, and everybody waiting for the prediction for the future, what's gonna happen in the region. Wissam, we'll start with you in the geopolitics. Lebanon, Hezbollah, and then we move to Syria, and then we move to Jordan, and then we move to Egypt, and we try to give a wild geopolitics analysis on what's going on and what might happen, and where is the next battleground, do you think?
Well, it's a complex situation. I think anybody who tries to give any simple explanations is probably going to be is going to miss some really important details. What we do know so far is that the skirmishes along the northern border of Israel, which is the southern border of Lebanon, have been to a certain degree limited. From a strategic perspective, I think Hezbollah seems not to have any interest in starting or perpetrating, the start of a war on that border. But they are ready, and they're extremely ready. In fact, I would say they're among the most ready armies in the entire Middle East, having fought multiple wars over the past 2 decades. And estimates have, up to 250,000 rockets and a few, tens of thousands of very precise rockets that can hit anywhere inside of Israel. So the military capabilities of Hezbollah are pretty stunning, and Israel knows that. I think for Israel to open up a war itself preemptively on the northern front is a question that maybe they're not ready to answer right now, but those military officers that are being asked that question are mostly sticking to the line, which is it's a stable border. Will that remain so? I think it will depend on how the Gazan war proceeds. If the Gazan war ends up being an annihilation, a genocide, then nobody really knows how all those who are surrounding Israel may react. If it's just a strategy for Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli establishment to regain part of that initiative, etc., and then they're going to back off, just like Sharon did multiple times over the past couple of decades, then in that case, I don't think the northern border is going to flare up any more than the skirmishes that are happening now, the tit for tat, if you will. There is one other factor that I think is key, is the presence of the United States there, which in my mind serves 2 purposes. One, to be there next to Israel and signs of support and all that kind of stuff. But I also think it's to act as a sort of to avoid escalation. And so in parallel to the military presence, we see Blinken going all over the region. And he's trying to solicit, a quieting of a potential regional flare-up. Because if you get the Gaza spreading into the south of Lebanon, you're going to get the south of of Syria also involved. And then potentially you might get, the eastern part of Egypt if, the Palestinians are forcefully pushed into Sinai. So then that opens a Pandora's box. I think the US knows this, and I think it's trying to circumvent it. The tragedy is that in the meantime, we all would prefer to see, a cessation of fire. It's not happening so far. And until it does, anything could happen.
Can I quickly just jump in here about the situation in Lebanon, being on the ground here and following the reports that are coming through? A few days ago, I've got a lot of contact with different diplomatic missions here. And there was, on Wednesday, there was quiet and calm, and there wasn't a feeling of anyone, of any real concern that it might flare up into a real battle in Lebanon. But today, in the last 24 hours, we've seen a shift in the diplomatic community, with America, Australia, and Canada in particular, and I think Germany also advising their citizens that to leave the country. And Australia has put on, flights to Israel to evacuate Australians, but it's given us warnings to maybe we should be moving out of the country. I'm not going anywhere, but there has been a shift in the diplomatic line. So there's information or intel must be coming through to, to that area to suggest something. In addition, just about 2 hours ago, we were following reports from Hezbollah, and Hezbollah has issued a statement saying that they are upping the ante and that we should be getting ready. This is among their community. So I've got sources in that community, and they started to get worried because this is different, because a few days ago, Hezbollah specifically stated, we don't want a war. Lebanon can't handle a war. The people of Lebanon can't handle another catastrophe because of the economic crisis. However, the narrative has now shifted. So there is more reason to be concerned about the battle escalating on the northern border.
Jim Clancy.
Sorry.
I think we look at the situation, and I don't have a crystal ball. But the one thing I do know is never underestimate even a small event, any event, to change the whole situation on the ground. Now, what have we seen? First of all, we've seen Hezbollah, and they were clearly calling on others, specifically the Palestinians on the West Bank, hoping for support from Hezbollah to open up as many fronts as possible, make life as difficult as possible as they could for the Israelis. I don't see them getting that right now. And I don't see them being in a position right now to amplify what's already been done. They are in a tight spot in Gaza, and certainly the people of Gaza are in a tight spot. The countries in the Gulf have not really said a whole lot. I mean, they've been reserved. They haven't come out in defense of Israel for the most part. But you see the authoritarian regimes all over the Middle East are concerned about the way things are going, and they don't want to get drawn in. There are groups within Syria and, of course, in Lebanon that could be, as Stacey was pointing out, the situation may be changing. I can't predict that, though. I just fear that with the U.S., with or without the U.S. Off the coast, the possibility of one event, one incident, changing all of these calculations is a very real risk.
Thank you, Jim.
One thing I would add, Tarek, one thing I would add also to what's being said is that the going assumption is that Gaza is going to lead straight to a northern, flare up or war even with Lebanon. But there are steps along the way that this axis, if you will, that exists, being supported with Iran, by Iran, etc., that there are multiple steps they can take before that, if I can call it that, great showdown. I don't know what would be great about it, but let's say between Hezbollah and Israel would even occur, which that would be a massive war, which is you still have the West Bank and you still have southern Syria. And so you have multiple fronts that could actually be escalated before you get to a full-blown regional war. I think if it gets to the Lebanon regional, a Lebanon-Israeli war, that will become quite regional. And so that would be a huge escalation, which Israel would hope the US would intervene and be on its side. That is what most analysts are saying. Now, even before you get to that point, the escalation itself from, say, Gaza to West Bank presumes that Gaza is not going to be able to defend itself. Most analysts will tell you that Gaza has more than 500 kilometers of underground tunnels, 500 kilometers. They have tens of thousands of rockets still. And for all intents and purposes, it's guerrilla warfare within an urban environment, which is a nightmare for any army. Strategists will tell you that the ratio of armies defending themselves inside of such an environment is 1 to 26, meaning you need 26 soldiers on the ground to be able to compete against one urban guerrilla fighter. That is stunning. Is Israel ready to take such huge casualties within Gaza? I'm not sure. I mean, yes, there are existential fears, but let's not assume away the capabilities of Gaza. Let's not immediately reach the conclusion that, what's happening in Gaza now is immediately going to lead to a war in Lebanon. If it even gets to a point where Gaza is, being completely razed or annihilated, that's when fears of regional involvement, either from the West Bank, from southern Syria, and from Lebanon, would come into the picture, but not at this point. I think there's still a lot of things to play out before we even consider. Everything happening right now is a tit for tat within, let's say, established rules. That is according to most military analysts.
Can we listen to Mr. Zogby, please?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, one of the reasons why this was able to happen in Gaza was 75% of the Israeli military was in the West Bank. They were in the West Bank because they were protecting settlements, and they were providing cover for some settlers. In some instances, they were not there to protect Palestinians, and so the military was in a state of not readiness around Gaza. Number two, the West Bank is in a position where it can explode at any time, and we're already seeing an escalation of reports of killings and bombings and shootings and whatever, and that could, I think, escalate. And I think Israel's wary of that. That would be a second front. And the third front in Lebanon, that's a war, I think, as you've all said, that no one wants, that no one could possibly ingest, given the amounts of mass destruction that will occur, certainly in Lebanon, where the infrastructure of the country and so many people will die, and it would be devastating. At the same time, there will be enormous damage in Israel, no doubt. And like the last time, I mean, many of the victims will end up being Arabs, because the northern part of Israel, the Galilee region, the Triangle, et cetera, are heavily Arab. And so it really is not a conflict anyone should want. But Hezbollah sort of set the stage for this. I mean, I would disagree with one thing that was said, and that is that Hezbollah set the stage. I mean, they said early on that if Israel does a ground invasion, that they will respond. That was not a smart statement to make if you don't want to do it, and I don't think they want to do it. I think they were doing it as a bluff, because they certainly, given the situation in Lebanon, last thing on earth Lebanon needs now is a destroyed infrastructure, and the killing of a couple thousand people. I think that's what the U.S. ships are doing there. They're not there to just show support to Israel. They're there as a threat to Hezbollah. With all of this is the largest aircraft carrier in the world, with all of our advanced armaments on it. It's not to supply Israel, it's to say we're going to get into this, which would be really stupid for the United States of America to get into this, for a country that has not, I mean, if our average of wars we've been in since World War II one lost were calculated the way we play baseball, the way we calculate baseball players, they wouldn't even be in the minor leagues right now. And we have a horrific record of getting into wars we lose because we frankly don't understand the culture, the contents, the consequences, the costs, whether or not there's citizen support. And frankly, this would be stupid for Biden and the Biden administration to get into it. So I think that there's constraints on all sides. Israel really doesn't want a northern war, although they're kind of pushing a bit. Now, I was going to ask you guys a question, and that is this corridor that Israel is establishing, this buffer zone, is it on the Israeli side or is it on the Lebanon side or is it on both? I mean, Israel normally, when they create a buffer, they go into the other country's territory to create the buffer zone. But are they using their own territory to do that? I'd like an answer to that. They don't want it. They couldn't handle a third front. They also, I don't think Hezbollah wants it. The U.S. may think that they are tough enough to weather the storm of getting into it. I think it would be a disaster for the U.S. to get into it. So I frankly don't know where this goes as we move forward. I just don't. I don't have a sense of that. But what I do know, and we're in the field right now to validate it, we're polling in 12 countries. Attitudes toward a range of issues, including Israel, including the Abraham Accords, including the issue of Palestinian rights. We were polling. We stopped the polling when this started, and we're going to go back again to get two sets. We had done about half. We'll have two sets of numbers. One is before this started and one after this started. I guarantee you, even right now, without looking at the results, because we don't have them in yet, that the numbers are going to dramatically shift in terms of Arab public opinion toward Israel, toward peace, and toward the United States and its role in the region.
To answer your question, Jim, there's two buffer zones. There's the blue zone, which is a buffer zone by the UN. That's between the two countries. Yeah. And then they just established another buffer zone in the northern Galilee so that whoever lives there is exited. That's
whoever lives there on the Lebanese side or on the
Israeli side. The Israelis established it on their own land.
They use their own territory. Okay.
Correct. Okay. It's geographically, it's at a disadvantage. That region is at a disadvantage from an Israeli point of view. And so they're exiting their people just in case there's.
But this is the first time the war in Israel land. What happened in Gaza was invasion. It was first time in history they're changing the way the military it is. And if Lebanon, they're expecting invasion from Lebanon to Israel. They asked for USS Ford to come to protect Israel, I think, not because to invade. Anyway, I'm not here to. I want to ask you these questions.
Well, but on this topic, Tariq, because sorry, excuse me, guys. Jim posed a really interesting question on polling. So I've seen some non-scientific polls within Lebanon, Jim, and I hope you can, through your scientific methods, you can either prove or disprove that showed the support for the war to a large degree depends on who starts the war. If Hezbollah preemptively starts the war, then you get into the internal politics of Lebanon and the divisions because nobody wants to assume a war. However, that changes if war is basically started by Israel on Lebanon. In that case, the polling completely shifts into a defensive position of we got to defend our land, which is really interesting in terms of the psyche, because as you know, in Lebanon, there's been extremely fractious politics over the past few years. However, when it comes to Israel, if Israel is the perpetrator and attacks, then there seems to be that the majority clusters around the defense, even though they may not like Hezbollah. I mean, it's not a political thing. But if it's the other way around, then that basically divides opinion. Hezbollah knows this. And their analysts know this as well. So they have to consider that if there isn't such a quote unquote invasion from Lebanon there, which I think would be insane, but and probably not in the realm of the likely.
Okay, we're gonna move to another country, Syria. Who would like to start? Syria. Jim, Clancy.
Well, I think you look at Syria today and you see the problems that are faced there and the way that there's still a low-level conflict going on. And in fact, there have been attacks carried out, I think, under the cover of the world looking the other way. In other words, looking into southern Israel and what has happened here. Syria still has a role to play. And it's one of those countries that has always been a primary player in the field of Middle East politics and Middle East conflicts. You know, at the same time, I have to look at this incident and you have to see the dramatic way that the perception of Israel's, its military, its invincibility has been eroded, it's been challenged, it's been undermined. And I think that most people believe that when all of this is over and they have their commission of inquiry, Bibi Netanyahu is going to be gone. But that only changes things depending on who is going to assume the reins in Israel. And I think that is, you know, a calculation that has to be considered. This whole loss of credibility, were they unprepared? They were mightily unprepared. Okay, they didn't have soldiers who were there, but when you realize it took 10, 12 hours in a tiny country like Israel in order to move effective troops to help some of these villages, there's a lot of people asking why. I mean, where were the helicopter airborne forces? Where, you know, they could have driven that distance. There's a lot of outstanding questions about the unpreparedness of Israel. And I think Syria and some of the groups operating inside Syria that are ostensibly opposed to Israel are thinking about that as well.
There's a question that was just posed, Tariq, which is an interesting one. It's Hezb is showing restraint so far, but it is Israel who is showing a lot of aggressiveness, I suppose, an unnecessary series of provocations in the south of Lebanon. Why? Could it be in Israel a plan to inflame the battle with Hezb profiting from the unique opportunity of US military support? Possibly. But I think the Israeli strategists, unless Israeli military strategy has been taken over by their extremists or zealots, they usually know how to calculate, you know, military calculations and risks. And it is a very highly risk strategy to open a multi-front war. That is not to say that they may not open it at some point. But at this point, to open it while Gaza is still, in the early days, and not knowing what might happen in the West Bank and southern Syria is a very, very highly, dangerous strategy. So what Israel might be doing is a tit for tat in order to, try to diffuse some of the frustrations, internal frustrations. They're doing something and has tit for tat back and forth, but they're staying within the same, framework, understanding, let's put it that way. It could escalate at any point, but so far they seem to be both playing, by their established rules over almost a couple of decades now.
Can I just comment on what you determine or you define as established rules? Because following the incursions and exchange of fire over the northern border, we have reports of Hezbollah attacking military installations. They're attacking certain, radar signal areas and different installations. But what we're seeing from Israel is a different attack. Yes, they've hit the Palestinian encampments where they know that they are. But last night and for the last few days, we saw the attack on the journalists. But last night there was attacks, even bombings as close to Marja'yun, and we lost 2 people were killed last night, 2 civilians in their home. And I have met today a resident of South Lebanon who escaped, and I was talking to him just this afternoon, who just explained how the South has been evacuated. Basically, only people who need to be there, who can't leave, have stayed, and the only people really in the area are the Hezbollah, people who are staying there to defend the border. But my question back to you, Wissam, is, the reality is that why is it okay for Israel to hit civilian targets, to kill journalists, to hit, the gentleman that I met today specifically said to me, and I was trying to get him on camera, I'm hoping I can get him on camera to tell us, because he was evacuating from his home, taking his daughters, children and wife away from their home. I can't remember the name of the village, but it's one of the ones that was targeted on Thursday, Friday, and they were driving behind the motorcade of the journalists who'd just come from Khan Yunis, the encampments, and then were moved to another town, Raisi, whatever it's called. I'm sure you'll know what I'm talking about. And they were literally a couple of 100 meters behind them when they saw the bomb hit the media, the press, cars, and he became extremely frightened. And that's when he said, I'm out of here. So, the Israeli army, with all of its intelligence and capability and, technology, did not have a missile go astray. And he said that the ambulance and the press was clearly marked, the vans, he was really frightened. So I just want to ask you that, they're pushing it way beyond the line, and they're using phosphorus bombs as well. So it's beyond the tit for tat here,
Well, I think they're trying to a certain degree, there are those within the Israeli establishment. Well, I wouldn't call it establishment. Let's call it those in power within Israel, particularly those that are extremist, and they could be part of the military, etc., that would love to see Hezbollah dragged into the war. The problem is that they're not going to be able to defeat Hezbollah because they weren't able to do it in 2006. Hezbollah is about 5 times more powerful today. And so, in just quantity of missiles and number of soldiers and training, it's just that. So is it a serious, incursion to drive Hezbollah into the war? Maybe some of them might like it. I think the more rational among them probably would prefer to avoid it. But those who do like it are hoping that if that happens, the US intervenes on the part of Israel. Now, what they expect out of the US, I have no idea. The US is not going to put any boots on the ground. The US, was humiliated when they left out of Afghanistan after many years, the longest war they've ever led in their history. And they still, or many in the US felt humiliated when they departed in that manner. I don't think the US is ready to put boots on the ground. How do you defeat a group like Hezbollah or Hamas?
Hezbollah
without boots on the ground? How do you defeat that?
Hezbollah playing a regional role as well. Hezbollah is
but guerrilla warfare. So it's asymmetric.
Syria, controlling Julan Heights. He is training camps there. Don't forget, his top leader died there. What's his name? Radwan. He died there. He was targeted there. They do their training there. They have the revolution that's happening in and the Captagon and the trafficking that they're doing.
Correct.
They're controlling and what's happening, the revolution in Jabal Druze in Jabal Arab in Suwaida for 55 days today. And what do you think about that? I want to ask you about that.
Jim?
The Jordan.
Is that for Jim?
Yes.
I just wanted to say one point before, which is there is an asymmetric war going on, Daisy. So to answer your question of why they attack civilians, because in many cases, there is no military to attack. This is not a symmetrical war. If you go back to history, there's a Roman general whose name was Fabian. And Hannibal, who was the Phoenician, basically, general at the time that made it all the way to the outskirts of Rome, was never defeated in any single battle. He defeated Romans in every single battle, but yet he lost the war. Why? Because they had asymmetric warfare strategies. And that's where Fabian military, it was led by a general that was called Fabian. That's where it comes from. It's an asymmetrical type of a war that keeps basically, pestering the large army. The Israelis know the military history, and so it's very hard to fight an asymmetric war. And so what they do is they punish civilians. And they punish civilians in order to bring that asymmetry, or they're attempting to bring that asymmetry down to their knees. The problem is, every time they've done that, it's only made those groups even more powerful. How many times have they incurred into Gaza? And Hamas is now more powerful than it was 20 years ago. They did a massive war on Lebanon in 2006. Hezbollah is 5 times more powerful than it was in 2006. And so that strategy of theirs of punishing an entire civilian, the entire civilian population into some form of a submission to pressure those guerrillas has simply not worked. So that is the vicious cycle that we are in. And I'm hoping that the US, or somebody like the US, I don't think there's anybody except the US really, can finally get to a point where it stomps its foot down and says, it puts an end to that vicious cycle. Because it's not helping anybody. It's not helping the Israelis, it's not helping the Palestinians, it's not helping anybody.
That would be very courageous indeed, if that were to happen, if the US were to put its foot down. And Wissam, I want to remind you, yes, the United States, we got a terrible record of ending these conflicts. But remember, we're really good at getting into them. And that's what the big, the concern here in the US is right now. How far will they be pushed? What if X happens or Y happens? I think coming full circle here, we need to know, what is Bibi Netanyahu's strategy? What is his plan? Here's a man we've already noted is probably going to lose his job as soon as they investigate anything. Then he could end up in jail on corruption charges. There's 4 cases against him. But before that, what can he do? What is his plan? I know for a fact that this is the man who never wants to see a peace treaty between the Palestinians and the Israelis. He wants nothing to do with a peace deal. How far will he go to ensure that legacy? And that's the legacy I think he wants, from personal experience talking with Bibi Netanyahu. And I'm afraid that he may have an end game in mind, one that includes mass expulsions of Palestinians. He would need an excuse. He would provoke what he needed for an excuse. But if he can brand all the Palestinians terrorists and one way or another push at least some of them out of the territory that's called Israel, I think he would be pretty happy with that.
It's very possible. And the politics inside of Israel, unfortunately, has been playing one of the key roles in driving this is the latest bout of multiple wars that have happened in the region. And a lot of it has to do with politics. But, politics could also drive to peace. And, Ehud Barak, for example, when Israel unilaterally withdrew in 2000 from most of the South, I thought that was a very, very brave decision that was taken, him being a military person. Problem is that Bibi Netanyahu is not. And will internal politics, particularly pushing him towards the right, further and further towards and he was already a very rightist candidate and prime minister, will it push him towards doing crazy things? Or has this unity government that was just put in place, was that a stopgap measure that basically forces Benjamin Netanyahu Yeah, and Gantz was an ex-general. I mean, he was the chief of staff, if I'm not mistaken, of the army, and so he knows his military. The question is, will that temper those impulses of Netanyahu and those extremists, or will it just serve as a rubber stamp? That is a question that I don't know if we have the answer to yet.
We're gonna move to the future. What might happen? Predictions. And Jim, I want to ask you about Iran. What's the nuclear deal? The geopolitics. They know they have the Shia crescent for all the way from Iran to Beirut through their proxies in Iraq, in Yemen, in Syria, and in Lebanon. What do you think? There is a possibility to hit Iran directly. Why hit the proxies? Go straight to the source, or they're gonna make a deal, or what do you think about Iran and the U.S. force? What they're gonna do? What do you think?
Well, you know, the U.S. is obviously lining up against Iran, has been. This is a political debate within the United States. Barack Obama, really, that was his big foreign policy achievement, was, getting the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran. And Donald Trump and the Republicans did away with it as soon as possible. It was always opposed by the Likud lobby here in the United States, very vociferously, that was invited to testify again and again before Congress. And it's even today, as you have all seen it, been used when the Biden administration gave them back $5 million or $5 billion of their own funds, their own Iranian funds. They turned around and the Republicans spread the rumor that all that was the money that was used in order to fund these terrible massacres carried out by Hamas in southern Lebanon. Of course, it's all false, but it's still going on. That's a still churning debate. The U.S. trying to perhaps isolate Iran. I mean, we've tried sanctions against everybody. The Biden administration working so hard, expending so much energy trying to get the Saudi-Israel peace deal or agreement of some kind going forward. If only they had worked that hard on the Palestinian-Israeli question. If only all of the diplomats that are involved in the various skirmishes around the world had worked that hard. It has never been seriously addressed. And I think a lot of it in the United States has to do with the strength of the Likud lobby, of the Israeli lobby, and politicians don't want to get involved in that. They don't want to risk what it may cost them in terms of their own future in political office. So the situation remains much the same. Israel isn't going to be able to bomb the notion of people who want freedom. You can't destroy that. You can talk about eliminating Hamas, but people will still want freedom. People will still want the possibilities in their lives, the possibilities to travel, to enjoy themselves, to enjoy peace and security. The Palestinians need it every bit as much as the Israelis do. So this conflict, I'm afraid, Wissam is right. It's going to take us all back to right where we started. And somebody's going to have to, at some point, show that they have the willpower, the guts to tackle the hard issues and not just keep kicking the can down the road.
There are some dynamics. I think to answer your question, Tariq, Iran is not something that Israel can attack directly, except some attacks, air attacks and stuff like that.
With the U.S.
Exactly. So because if Israel to attack Hezbollah is implicitly asking for the help of the US, can you imagine attacking a nation like Iran? So that is a big deal, and that could actually take the world to a world war. Let's not forget, you posed the question of Syria. There's Russians in Syria.
Yes.
Okay, there's Russians in Syria, and there's Russians in southern Syria by some reports. And so those rules of the game have to be extremely carefully looked at by whoever is planning whatever military strategy. You don't want to get, those kinds of powers involved. And then you have an extension, which is China, that has signed a lot of economic agreements and all that kind of stuff with Iran that will be affected. So to answer your question directly, is there, can Israel can do some, missile strikes and assassinations and stuff like this for sure. But can they launch a full-blown attack to a nation that's 20 times their size? That's if Israel wants to do it. Does Iran need to do it? Iran doesn't really need to do it. Iran is fighting a proxy war, and it's very happy doing that. It has all the assets in the region, and it is they have a very kind of cold, rational way of thinking and how they implement. And so why would they do a direct war? It doesn't really make sense. So I think those are the dynamics. Coming back to what Jim was saying, I think, I'm not delusional, but I think that this war could actually be that missing piece that was required for peace. Because what it showed was that even after 75 years of its existence, Israel is still very vulnerable as a state without having peace. It needs peace. And I'm not talking about those Abraham Accords that, in my opinion, are very superficial and some economic agreements and back and forth and stuff like this, fine. But really fundamentally, if you go down, to the roots of the cause, without having a Palestinian peace with Israel, all these agreements are just basically pointless or non-sustainable. Just look at what happened with Saudi. And if there's an attempt at genocide, I doubt that the Emirates, Bahrain, and any other nation that have signed the Abraham Accords will be able to keep those accords, in place while an entire population is being exterminated or alternatively banished into a desert. So that peace, there is an opportunity for peace right now. There is an opportunity for peace. I think what's missing is the interlocutors. That's what's missing right now. So who in Israel can rise to that occasion? Bibi Netanyahu? I doubt it. He doesn't seem to be that person. And I think Jim just alluded to the reasons as to why. It could be personal reasons. It could be his own, political survival, whatever it is. He's not a peace man. So it rests on the Israeli society to get rid of him. Get rid of him, get somebody that can do peace. And on the Palestinian and Arab side, there also needs to be, somebody to stand up and say enough is enough and we need to do peace. Can this happen after this war? I'm hoping it's an opportunity. The Israelis and the Arabs have never been closer to regional peace in their history. Saudi is this big, massive prize of peace. They're not going to get it without having that small little piece happening inside of Palestine. So I see a big opportunity here. Israel has a lot to lose. It has a lot to lose. Israel has a lot going for it, but it has a huge amount to lose. Everything from oil interests to technology.
Is this war in Gaza? Is this war in Gaza or in Palestine any way related to the G20 deal, Silk Road, that is supposed to be? It just happened recently in India. The billions of dollars that should be spent in this region to make this, from Haifa to Saudi Arabia to India, the Silk Road, has to do with the war, and why now the war started? Do you have any questions about that? And I want to ask Jim also quickly about Jordan and Jebel and the Druze area in Syria, and we want to discuss 5 minutes about Egypt. And then we take questions, and we have lots of questions that we want to answer.
I don't claim to be an expert right now. You have to be there on the ground to witness what's going on. Like so many other countries, I think Jordan, King Abdullah would very much like to stay out of this They know full well that Ariel Sharon's old phrases about the Palestinian homeland actually being in Jordan. He's heard that, there's no doubt. But there's so many issues that are there. And, you know, you mentioned the Druze and all of these different things.
The drug
I don't feel,
trafficking, sorry, the drug trafficking, the Captagon is all going through Jordan from Jabal Druze area, from the mafia area, and going to that's why, and he attacked, he recently by drones and attacked the Captagon area at the borders in with Syria. Sorry to interrupt.
no, that's fine. And, you know, obviously there are those kinds of details which I think we miss when I'm, you know, what, 7,000 miles away. We're not, you know, paying attention to every one of these developments, but they're all significant. There's no doubt about it. And it's good that you mention them there. I think we've got to stay focused on what are the big issues. What's the strategy for Israel going forward? What is the red line for the United States in saying this has got to stop? I mean, I think Biden has mentioned it a couple of times. I understand there is a need to show support for Israel. There is a need to make its people feel more secure, to be comfortable after the massacres that they witnessed that really shook the foundations of the belief in their way of life. You know, what this state of Israel really meant for them in terms of security. So, you know, I understand some of what Biden's doing, but I want to know, what are his limits? Are we going to go back to the Condoleezza Rice days, when she said, well, we'll let it go on for a little bit longer? It's not a matter of time, it's a matter of what's happening. And we are at that crucial juncture right now. We don't have all the answers. We've said it here several times that we have to see how all of this plays out. But we also have to be ready to identify and report on the danger signals. And they are all over the map. They are around the Middle East. They are right there. They're on the West Bank. They're certainly around Gaza and in southern Lebanon. But those are the things that as journalists, we have to keep an eye out for. And we have to still challenge ourselves and wonder, what's it going to take? It might be a moment, as Wissam said, it might be a moment when serious peace negotiations might be brought about. But, you know, I remember 1991 and the conference in Madrid. It was after the Iraqis were kicked out of Kuwait after invading there. When that conflict was over, then Secretary of State James Baker had these, Russia and the US sponsored them, a peace conference in Madrid, Spain. And it brought people together and many wonderful things were said. It could have been the start of something beautiful, but it hasn't turned out that way. So there's no guarantee, however much of a wake-up call this terrible events of October 7th have been, it doesn't matter unless it's acted upon. And we really don't know what the actors are going to do in this play. We can only watch.
A new map for the Middle East.
Oh, sorry, Thawra. I just wanted to add something, which is war has a cost and peace has a cost. Okay, war has a cost. Right now, you know, Hamas is not a regional decision maker. Israel is one of the regional decision makers, but there are others. So if they take the war route, there's going to be a cost for that. And if they take a peace route, there's also a cost to that. It's a question of benefits and costs. And it's also a question of sustainability. 75 years of existence of Israel has not proven that the Israeli model of forceful colonialism, call it settlement, call it whatever you want, it doesn't work. There's always going to be pushback. The Palestinian population is now in total more than 5-6 million people within the territories, and I think 1 or 2 million people inside of Israel, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that latest number. There's a lot of people. You can't establish a stable being while you have this instability or unstable factor on the inside. There's people on, you know, on the Israeli right, the far, far right, the fascists, if you will, that would like to exterminate the whole lot or banish the whole lot. And I'm sure they have that in their mind. That will have a cost. That will have a massive cost. So there are costs and benefits. The interesting thing is that Israel is at a point right now where it is extremely close, or it was extremely close to being able to establish a peace with, the kingpin of this entire thing, which is Saudi Arabia. And that failed, or at least it stopped. If it continues along this line, that's gone. If it continues along the war lines, just basic militarism, a Sparta, just a nation that's going constantly to war, they might have their gas interests at risk. All those kinds of things start surfacing. So that has a cost. So what we need to think about is, either the different regional players, including Lebanon, and there's a question here, which is what is expected from the Lebanese, which I'll answer in just a second, but also the larger, bigger players, such as the US, etc. Is this model continuously, repeating itself sustainable? I frankly think it isn't. And Biden is one of those players who's been around for such a long time that he would know that it's not sustainable. I'm hoping that he would be that brave, president that takes that, initiative. I'm not sure he is, but I hope he is. Answering the question of what is expected of us from the Lebanese.
Before you answer that question, can
Oh.
I just make one comment on that? The fact that everything you were saying earlier, and you too, Jim, were very, very valid, and I agree with it all. The biggest risk for Israel is what you just stated. It has the most to lose if it continues down the war line, because of all of the regional issues and opportunities that have been manifested over the last 8 to 10 months with Saudi Arabia and with the other Gulf nations. It has so much more to lose than to gain. And as you said, they will be
lose more. It could lose Egypt's peace if it pushes 2 million people into Egypt. It could, if it pushes the West Bankers into Jordan, there goes that piece. I mean, it basically risks losing everything.
It destabilizes the entire region. So there's a lot more at stake at the moment if Israel continues down that line. And that's why it's necessary to have an independent player, which we're not seeing right now, other than Antonio Guterres, who's the only one that I'm seeing on the global stage speaking, in a moderate and intelligent, wise voice to resolve or calm this situation down. But there is so much more for Israel to lose than anyone else if it continues down the warmongering line. And that is it will destabilize the entire region. The ball is in Israel's court. If it wants economic progress, peace with its neighbors, if it wants what you're saying, the change to bring peace to its own people, it has to lead. And right now, the anger, the vengeance, the animosity that's raging in those right-wing circles, not in the left-wing or moderate circles. There's a lot of peace-loving Israelis and Jewish
100%.
people. It's 100%. Sitting in the right wing. And unfortunately, like you mentioned, that coalition, that the only way he got into power was to align himself with the most fundamentalist right-wing parties in Israel, which I think is driving his behavior and his decisions too, because he did a deal with them. He did a deal with the devil, the extremist devil, and now we're seeing, the expectations of this right wing is to come down hard, and there's no rational minds and leadership at the moment in Israel, or they're not given the space to speak.
Maybe we should do another episode only targeted for special areas, because we have to talk about Egypt. All
before
these
that,
rockets.
there's 3 questions that were asked. Would you like to answer those before we get? So there's a question: what is expected from the Lebanese to sit and wait and watch, or take preventive measures? I think that's a great question, and I actually did a video with TTV just a couple of days ago, basically calling upon the Miqati government to unite the country in case Lebanon is attacked. Like I said before, the Lebanese are united in defending their land. They will be divided if it's a preemptive strike by Hezbollah into Israel. I think then you're going to find some divisions. So the job of Miqati is to come out, speak to his people, which he rarely does, except when he wants money or sharing of some responsibilities and stuff. He needs to come out, speak to his people, and say, we need to be all united in preparing for something that may happen. Hopefully it will not, but if it does, we need to all unite. We need to accept our people from the south. We need to support those people. We need to have the emergency services ready. I'm not delusional in thinking that we have all the resources, but he's meeting with the French, he's meeting with the Italians, he's meeting with the Americans.
The Iranians.
With whoever, with the Iranians. This is not a badge of honor to meet with these people. If he really wants to serve his country, he would meet with them and ask for preparatory work or equipment, etc., in case something bad happens. And then he would go and talk to them and tell them, ask them to unite in this time so that the nation is together. By the way, if he takes that, that is the approach to make Israel think twice, thrice, 4 times before it attacks. Because the worst thing for Israel is to attack a nation that's united in defending itself.
I wish we can elect a president in a couple of days. I wish that will be a blow to everybody. Jim, I want to ask you a question also about Egypt. All these rockets, the first day they launched 5,000 rockets. And on average, there is 1,000 to 2,000 rockets is fired from Gaza. With all these subways and channels of, I think we lost Jim. About Egypt.
Jim is here. Jim is here.
About Egypt. Yani, if they knew is the problem, if they didn't know, it's even a bigger problem. And Egypt now it's in very deep financial situation, like everybody in the Middle East. They told Morsi, not Morsi, Sisi, not to re-elect himself, not to become president again. He did it. And what's the price? Do you think there is a price Egypt or role can play?
Well, Egypt is there. And, there's all that discussion of opening up a humanitarian corridor and letting aid come into Gaza from Egypt. And they've been resistant to that. Egypt has a lot to lose, yes. They need the funding. And, unfortunately, they're just accused of having bribed the head of the Foreign Relations Committee, Menendez. And as a result of all of that, huge embarrassment. And Menendez has a penchant for gold bars, I guess, and Mercedes-Benz automobiles. But it was all included. It was all revealed, and the FBI has been looking at him. And it puts Egypt in a very precarious position. We know the story of Sisi and how he's a part of the military, as was Mubarak before him, and how badly the Muslim Brotherhood played its own cards when it had the chance to rule Egypt. They fell into his hands, and a collective sigh of relief was heard in autocratic regimes all around the Middle East, especially in the Gulf. So yes, I mean, Egypt is there. Egypt could be a huge factor in all of this, but I don't think they're in a great position to do something decisive. They're clearly wanting to take their advice, if you will, from entities like the United States, because the United States has been helping to keep them afloat economically and not doing a great job of it. But at the same time, with questions being asked about that, I think Egypt is very much within the realm now of, just sitting there waiting for somebody to tell them what to do, because they realize it could have a huge impact on Egypt as well. Domestically.
Or waiting who will pay more.
Well, this could be the case. As we discuss all of these issues, we keep coming around and around. And I understand the feeling that, yes, it would be good if Mikati were to, step forward and bring the people together. But I wonder, wouldn't that be seen from the outside as an endorsement for whatever Hezbollah wants to do? As support for them in one way or another. The wrong signals, the misinterpreted signals, Wissam?
It's a great question. I think if he sets the right framework, which is a defensive framework, I don't think so. I mean, who would not accept self-defense? Now he has to have Hezbollah, continue to play within the rules. But you know what? I mean, it shouldn't make much of a difference to Miqati, because if Israel, gets into a war with Hezbollah, regardless of who starts it, the Lebanese population are gonna, suffer anyway. So whether Hezbollah attacks first or whether Israel attacks first. And so what is the cost of him uniting the people behind helping each other? What's the cost? Now, he does need, you're right, he does need to make sure that he's not seen as being endorsing any preemptive strikes by Hezbollah on Israel. I don't think he has control over Israel. I don't think any of the Western allies or the nations believe he does. I think he's ridiculed in that regard. And emblematic of this is the speech he gave at the UN. The camera just moved to the hall and there was nobody there. He was literally giving a speech to himself and a couple of other people. Nobody pays attention to him. But there's nothing that stops him or anybody's going to punish him for asking the people to unite, to help each other in case war comes. I think that is responsible leadership. I think that, would gain respect of nations, but not for him to go out and say, okay, let's go to war. And no, that's not what should be requested. He should just say, this is, we need to be ready for, ambulance services. The army is within the 17, and he's come out and said that a couple of days ago. But then the interviewer, the journalist that was asking him the question, she said, because he was justifying all that Hezb is doing. And at one point, the journalist says, so what's your role in all of this? It's as if the entire government of Lebanon was completely, sidelined. As a Lebanese, I should not accept that. I should say, fine, I know you're weak. I know the government is not in a strong position. But what stops you from, serving humanitarian corridors for people leaving the South? What stops you from offering, food, etc., or ambulance services or whatever, or asking it from these agencies and coming out and talking to the people and kind of making them less tense, making them understand that, yes, things are not, certain, but the government is going to try its best to support, etc. That is what we lack in Lebanon, Jim. And I think it's a great shame because the people deserve more. They really do.
Yeah, I think that everybody is in agreement that they don't want to see a conflict be visited on Lebanon because they know what it looks like already. They know how it will be carried out. At the same time, there's an understanding too, it would seem, that Hezbollah has got to needle Israel. It's going to happen. Those a few mortar rounds, a missile here and there, something that could be blamed on somebody else. Hezbollah wants to be a force that distracts Israel at this time that they're concentrating their firepower on the Palestinians in Gaza. And the question, I guess, that everybody has to ask that, what is the threshold? How far does Israel go without triggering some kind of a response, greater response, be it on the West Bank, be it inside Lebanon, be it coming from another Arab country, rebels, fighters that are located in Syria, that are aligned with various groups? All of those questions, I mean, just brings us to that top level, which is, what is going to be the threshold?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, what the latest announcements coming from Hezb folks is that it's extermination, mass annihilation, that kind of stuff. They're talking about that language. And when prodded, would you get involved if there's a ground invasion? I guess they've been asked that question. They've backtracked by saying that they believe that Hamas has the capabilities and doesn't need us in a ground invasion, but we are supporting them morally, as well as through these tactics that you just rightfully mentioned, which is, tit for tat on the northern border, half the Israeli army is up north, etc. Those kind of support mechanisms is what they're coming back and saying that they're supporting. But they haven't said that if and when a ground invasion happens, at least not in the last few days, that they would go in. They've actually tried to distance themselves with that. And then their analysts have also highlighted the chronological order of involvement, which is even before you guys ask us that we're going to get involved, you know, maybe you should be asking the West Bank and Southern Syria, you know, and all of these players. It's not just about Hezb getting involved. That is how I think they've been dealing with the issue. You know, meanwhile, I think the Lebanese government does have a role to play in quieting things down. You know, quieting things down within the communities, within the various communities.
Elect the president.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way, but I don't know if that's politically tenable now, but yeah, that's one way that they could do it. I think it's hard to do it at this point in time.
Anybody, I would like to thank you, everybody. We have to wrap it up, but I want to ask if anybody want to ask a question before we thank everybody. Anybody would like, please go ahead. Joe Dow, you wanted to ask a question. Go ahead.
I'm just going to say thank you because I've got to run, but I'll leave you.
Hello.
It's nice seeing you.
Bye.
Karim Mroui had a question.
Okay, let's go, Joe, and then Karim.
Good evening. Good evening. I wanted just to make two remarks, not really asking questions. I wanted to, Mr. Yafi, you said several times that Hezbollah is 5 times stronger than it used to be. I do agree, and maybe more than 5 times. However, what happened in Israel last week has to be read properly, and it's not something that was there in the war in 2006 and before. They have 1,500 persons that are dead. Kids, no kids. The situation is completely different. So their approach also is going to be completely different. They are allowing themselves to have much more casualties, where in the previous war, if they had 1 or 2 military people that were abducted or 1 or 2 tanks that were hit, it was a big issue for them. Now, against what happened last week, they are going to be also much more aggressive. Somewhere, somehow, it might match the aggressivity of, let's say, the game of power of Hezbollah, in case needed. I would like to ask this question, actually. That was my first question. Is in case the Israeli army is cornered in the invasion, the ground invasion, or anywhere else, is it a scenario where it would go and do a hit on Hezbollah that would drag a huge response from Hezbollah in order to drag the US military to respond? Because this is the scenario that I think would really do serious damage. And another thing, the rule of
what would be that big? What would be that big, John?
I don't know. They would do it. They would
hit invasion.
They would hit. No. They would not go on ground invasion. We know this. They would not do that.
Okay.
They would hit Dahye. They would hit the airport. They would hit anything that would not allow Hezbollah to stay under these rule of engagement, as we call them. And which, by the way, if we are reading a bit today, they are really they have escalated a lot. And now the last 2-3 hours we're talking, something is seriously going on, maybe crossing a bit these lines. We can maybe read them because the ground invasion is coming very soon, but it's too much. It's being very hot, and it's escalating on many points and in many places. I hope they will stay in these rules of engagement.
I think that's where
JD,
the US
you've got to
can
keep
play a
something in
role.
mind. There's something that's happening here. There's a circumstance that Israel has not faced ever before. None of us have. Like
Exactly.
There's 150 hostages somewhere inside Gaza. And believe me, that is going to be a very important factor in any calculations of what Israel is going to do. They can't just dismiss those hostages and say they're lost. Those are 150 people, and they're from various, they have dual nationalities.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that come involved here, and hostages is going to rise as a bigger issue, I think, in the days ahead. Even a bigger issue than, what are you going to do on the ground? How deep you're going to go in? I suspect they'll be, testing the waters, so to speak, but doing so always with an eye right directly on those hostages.
I think also there's a dimension of the U.S. I think, most reasonable people looking at the situation will write off or, kind of not take seriously a ground invasion by the Israelis of Lebanon. Let's put that to the side. So then they have aerial bombardment, and in a way that's part of the rules of engagement. So as they have escalated, so have been, when Israel or Hezbollah have killed a soldier, the other one has killed a soldier. And when they've killed civilians, it tit for tat within a range. If it goes to such a degree where they feel so desperate that they have to attack, Dahi, for example, or the suburbs of Beirut, what is the end game of that? I think their strategists don't think one step, right? They have to think beyond that step. You could say, okay, what if there are assassinations, etc. But the thing is that this is part of the tit for tat, right? And there have been multiple assassinations over the past few years, some of them extremely high profile, like Soleimani. And you've seen the measured response by Iran, because they're playing the long game. So in my mind, I don't see a regional war breaking out, but it is possible. It is possible. And the reason for this is primarily the US role of being there and not allowing the crazies to take control of strategy, military strategy on the one hand, and at the same time, Iran playing the long game, not playing the short game. Iran is playing a very, very long game, and they're assuming a lot of the assassinations, a lot of the hits, some of which have been massive. I expect Hezbollah to continue along those lines. Now, if it gets to a point of extermination, they're exterminating Gaza, or there's genocide, etc., then everything, all these assumptions might go out the door, and then there might be some other, considerations by these groups. I don't see it happening right now, but it is possible.
Well, let's hope so.
Karim Rui, who want to say something? And we'll
Yes, hello. Hi, Tariq. I think Jim and Wissam covered all the bases, so there's very little to say. My biggest worry is that there's very little leadership or capable of resolving this issue politically and very quickly. There's terrible lack of leadership in Israel and in Lebanon, and certainly the U.S. hasn't shown a lot of the usual capability that it usually has in resolving issues like that. So I think that we are in for a conflict that's I feel we're entering a quagmire again. So this is going to drag. The hostages issue, as Jim Clancy just said, is paramount in the heads of Biden, I think, but that wouldn't resolve the conflict. We need a different kind of thinking, much deeper solutions. I don't see that anywhere. Certainly, Secretary of State Blinken hasn't given a glimmer of what he has in mind of what the end game could be. So yes, it's a quagmire. If we get to a truce, okay, it will only be a truce, and then it will flare up again. I think Israel has to think very deeply about how to coexist and how to integrate itself in this region. It's not going to happen the way things are going on right now in Gaza. So yes,
There's also the dimension, Karim, of the economic. So, you know, the old saying of it's the economy, stupid. And I think the Israelis know that really well. Right now, their gas is on hold. Right now, their trade is on hold. Right now, I mean, the Israeli economy is a very dynamic economy. And, you know, it will hurt. And they won't be able to come and present the bill to the United States because the US is also struggling, and the US is already funding to the tune of tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, the Ukraine war, which is strategically, you know, extremely important because it sits at the entrance of Europe. So there's an economic dimension that leads me to believe that while it can be a long quagmire, it won't. And it's the economic dimension that leads me to think it's not going to be a multi-years Vietnam type of a thing. And plus, I think the political cost within the Israeli, you know, establishment is really, really heavy. I don't know if Bibi Netanyahu will be able to survive this. Definitely not in the long term, but I have my doubts in the short term as well. So, you know, now he's put up this emergency, you know, just as dictators like to do, you know, emergency declaration and all that kind of stuff. So he has this position for a short while. But if you know, body bags start flowing back into Israel, and if that situation, as Jim said, of all of those that have been taken back into Gaza, the Israelis that are now kidnapped and taken into Gaza, that's, you know, those two are very, very, very difficult issues to deal with. And I don't know if he can survive it. So these things lead me to believe it won't be a long-term quagmire.
Thank you, Wissam. Annie, quick question. Annie, your quick question.
Thank you so much for your time today, everyone. I am Ani Kasparian from the New Lebanon TV, and I just had a quick question for you all. I did enter
ex-CBS.
Ex-CBS, yes. And I wanted to ask a quick question. I don't know if you already spoke about this, but there was a tweet, I believe from a journalist, that said that the Egyptian intelligence minister did call Netanyahu 10 days before Hamas's attack and warned him of, quote, something unusual, a terrible operation that was about to take place in Gaza, and Egyptians were apparently surprised by the indifference shown by Netanyahu. To me, if that was a true statement, then this whole thing was something that Israel had been waiting for so that they could carry out these attacks in Gaza without foreign intervention stopping them, and also make them look like they're okay, they're not a bad guy. What are your opinions on all of that? And did you also see that report?
I did not see the report, but I am here to tell you that, you know, all these kinds of reports have said, oh, they did get a warning. It was this, it was that. This is very common in situations like this, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. The hubris of Benjamin Netanyahu is such that he thinks he understands everything, that he has control of everything. And he would, of course, dismiss that kind of warning as, oh, yeah, right. Another 25 rockets are going to come from Gaza. We'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. Not at all. Not at all. Thinking that it would end up in bloody massacres of men, women, and children.
Okay.
It's hard to believe that they would. But plus, I mean, these kinds of reports usually don't go to one person. They go to an entire establishment, some of which are political opponents. And so it could be used. So I don't really see that this kind of a thing could, you know, could be a conspiracy theory. I just don't see it.
Jim Clancy, Wissam, everybody, thank you very much. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you, ThawraTV. Thank you, TTV.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Annie. Thank you.
Good to see you
Good
again,
night.
Jim.